Welcome back. We are ready to continue our Old Testament studies. We are ready for the story of Solomon. Solomon is lesson 22 of the series, and it's found in 2 Samuel 12 through 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1. Also, it's found in 1 Chronicles chapter 29 through 2 Chronicles chapter 9. And as we begin to look at it, we find that Solomon was the son of David and Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 11 through 12 kind of gives us the background of this story. Remember, the first son died because of David and Bathsheba's sin. And therefore, David comforted his wife and went into her, and God honored it and gave her other children. Solomon was actually the fourth living son from Bathsheba. We find in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 5. But interesting, he was actually the 10th son, at least the 10th son of David, depending on when some of the other children were born that we're not really given specifics on. But it was Solomon that David chose to be the next king. Now, this God had foretold through Samuel in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12 to 16, and 1 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 6 through 9, that he told David that his offspring would be king. In fact, he instructed him. He said, I want your offspring to do the building of the tabernacle. David was excited and was planning on doing that. And God said, no, you've been a man of war. You've done a great job. I want your son to be. He's going to be a man of peace. Well, it's interesting because Solomon means peaceful. So David knew it was going to be one of his sons, and he chose that it would be Solomon. We think probably there's several factors that were involved in this. One of them was it would appear that David had specified Solomon. We find in 1 Chronicles 22, 6 through 10, that when David called his son in as he was getting him ready to become king, and he told him, he said, I had it in my heart to build a house for the name of the Lord my God. But this word of the Lord came to me, and he said, you've shed much blood, you've fought many wars. You're not to build a house for my name, because you've shed so much blood on the earth on my side. But you will have a son who will be a man of peace and rest. I will give him rest from all of his enemies on every side, and his name will be Solomon. I will grant Israel peace and quiet during his reign, and he's the one that will build my house for my name. He will be my son. I'll be his father, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. So from this, we deduct that God basically had pointed out Solomon, and therefore when Solomon was born, that's what they named him. One thing we know for sure, there is a connection to God's statement of love for Solomon found in 2 Samuel 12, 24 and 25. This is clear back when David went into Bathsheba to comfort her because of the death of their first son. And it says that she gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon, and the Lord loved him. And because the Lord loved him, he sent word through Nathan the prophet to name him Jedediah, which means beloved of the Lord. So definitely he was chosen by God. He was evidently pointed out through David, and David honored it and chose him to be the next king. Well, it wasn't until David's latter years that he actually crowned Solomon. In fact, it was kind of rushed a little bit, so to speak, because one of David's other sons, actually his fourth son that was born to him in order, Adonijah, began to think, hey, wait a second. I should be the next king. I should be the one that takes over the throne. So he begins to kind of sneak around his dad's back in his dad's latter years. He's getting close to the time of death, and he begins to put it in motion. We find in 1 Kings 5, verse 5 and also 7 through 10 how that he calls others together. He says, I'm going to be king. And he conferred with Joab, the son of Jeriah, and Abiathar, the priest, and they gave him their support. But Zadok the priest, Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shemaiah, and Ray, and David's special guard, he didn't invite them. He didn't tell them. They didn't join in with him. And so he began to set it up and get it all ready, begin to have a party where he was getting ready to announce that he was the next king. Well, Nathan heard about it. And so he contacted Bathsheba and he said, didn't David say Solomon was to be the next king? She said, yes, he did. Well, did you know that Adonijah, he's trying to bring the kingdom in under him. I mean, he thinks because he's the fourth in order, whereas Solomon, he's only number 10 or so, that he should have the right. And the problem of it is, my life isn't going to be worth much, and neither is yours, and neither is Solomon's if Adonijah becomes king. I'll tell you what, let's you go in and talk to David and just tell him, say, David, I thought you were going to anoint Solomon to be king. And when he kind of acts surprised because he doesn't know anything about it, and he says, well, yes, I did. Then you say, well, why is Adonijah over partying with all these different people and he's getting ready to declare himself to be king? And I'll give you enough time to finish talking a little bit, and then I'll just kind of walk in as if it's by accident, and I'll say, David, what is it? I thought Solomon was to be king. And then he'll know that it's not just something that you made up, and he'll realize it is true. So they did that. And when David found out, he said, what? No, Solomon is to be king. Bring him in. And so he gave him the outline. They went together. They got Solomon. They anointed him with oil. They celebrated. They paraded him through the streets, and everybody's yelling and shouting and excited because a new king has been announced. And all this noise gets up to the party where Adonijah is. And the people around Adonijah say, what's going on? And the report comes in and says, well, David has just anointed Solomon to be the next king. Oh no. The people with Adonijah get really worried in a hurry. And they think, oh no, we're in a very dangerous place because, they find out that we're here trying to anoint Adonijah to be king. That we're liable to either go to jail or be killed. So they all disappeared and ran away. Well, the people were excited. In fact, we even find another time where they anointed Solomon a little bit later, re-anointed him in 1 Chronicles 29, 22 to 25. And they ate and drank with joy in the presence of the Lord that day. Again, we see that symbolism that shows us that God was behind us. And they acknowledged that Solomon, the son of David, was king a second time and anointed him to serve God. So it was exciting, and God made sure that the man that was to be king went in. Well, David charged Solomon. He said, I've got some things you need to carry out when you become king. Number one, concerning the Lord. I want you to understand clearly you can never take that for granted. David had messed up. He had sinned. Yes, God had honored that sin, as was evident with Solomon being there. But he had also learned that nothing else really mattered beyond serving God. He told him in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 2 through 4, I'm about to go the way of all the earth, he said. So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him. Keep his decrees and his commands, his laws and regulations, as is written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you go. And then the Lord can keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they live faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. Wow, what a promise. And he said, and he showed Solomon, he said, the secret is keeping God front and center at all times. Well, he also gave him some other commands. One was concerning Joab, 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 5 through 6 and verse 28 through 34. And he reminded him how that Joab had murdered Abner, the commander of Saul's army. When Abner was seeking to make peace and come over to David, Joab saw him as a threat, so he had him killed. That's back in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 8 through chapter 3, verse 39. Then he also reminded him of the time back 2 Samuel 17 through 19, and actually even in the chapter 20, when Absalom, David's third-born son, rose up to take over the kingdom, and he had appointed Amasa over the troops. Then, after Absalom was killed, and Amasa set out to return the kingdom to David, why, David decided he was going to replace Joab with Amasa as a commander of his armies because, well, Joab hadn't been always straightforward and honest, and therefore Joab had murdered him. So you deal with Joab, deal with him accordingly. Well, he did. In fact, he had him executed. Sounds kind of violent, but then Joab had murdered several men because they threatened him. So it was actually true judgment. Then he said also concerning the sons of Barzillai, 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 7, he said, I want you to honor them and bless them because they've honored their father. They've followed his commands. They've done everything. Just, I want you to show honor to them as they have honored their father. So Solomon did that. And he said, oh, there's one other person, Shimei. Back, remember when my son was trying to chase me out and I had to leave town for a little bit because of what Absalom was doing, he says, he met me as I was leaving and began to call down curses and bad mouth and everything else as we went out of town. Well, when I came back, my men, they said, hey, we need to take care of Shemaiah. That's not right that he would do that. David said, no, this is a time of victory, a time of rejoicing. We're not going to do that. We'll leave him. But he said, I want you to take witness. He's very devious. Watch him carefully because he, at a moment's notice, could rebel against you. So David gave him this charge in 1 Kings chapter 2, 8 through 9. And then we find verse 36 to 46 tells more of the story. But Solomon goes to him. He says, Shemaiah, I want you to stay in the city. Don't leave it for any reason. That way I'll know that you're not doing anything you shouldn't be doing. I'm going to give you your life, but you don't leave the city. If I ever find out for any reason that you've left, well, I'm not going to know what you're doing, and your life, well, I'll have to take it. Well, for 3 years, Shemaiah stayed right there, and there weren't any problems. But then a servant ran away, and he decided enough time had passed, well, he'd go get him. So he chased the servant down and brought him back. And when Solomon found out about it, he called him in. He said, I thought I told you never to leave the gates of this city. I can't trust you. Therefore, he had him executed as well. Every charge that his father gave him, he carried it to completion. Well, started to anyhow. He completed the ones concerning Joab, concerning the sons of Barzillai, and concerning Shemaiah. And he started to, as we're going to see, concerning God. And he started to honor God in all ways. In fact, the Lord appeared to Solomon at Gibeon, 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 4 through 28. And then also it's recorded in 2 Chronicles 1, 7 to 17. And the Lord appeared to him and said, Solomon, what is it that you want? I'm going to give you a chance, whatever you want to ask for. What is it that's important to you? And Solomon responded to him and said, wow, I'm young. Your people are great people and awesome people. God, I just need wisdom to be able to rule them and to rule them in a way that will honor you. Will you just give me that wisdom that I need? And God said, yep, I'll do that. In fact, since you asked for wisdom to rule my people, and you didn't ask for wealth, and and you didn't ask for long life, because your heart was right, I'm going to honor you with that wisdom, but I'm also going to honor you with great wealth and with long life. Well, Solomon became known for his wisdom. Why, even today, a lot of people, whenever they want to use a definition of wisdom, they'll say, well, the wisdom like that of Solomon became almost a blessing. May you have the wisdom of Solomon. So he was honored with great wisdom, known for his wisdom. In fact, he wrote the vast majority of the book of Proverbs, which is known as the book of wisdom. We find it everything about it. Solomon seemed to be doing really good. He was making good judgments. He was following God. He had a great communion. In fact, he carried through. It took 7 years, but he built the temple. Yes, his father had provided many of the supplies for him, but then he rounded up all the extras and got the people to do it. And First Kings 5, verse 6 and 8, and then clear down to chapter 9, verse 9, we find that he completed that temple. And it took 7 years to do it, but he was faithful to carry through. Everything is looking really good. It looks like Solomon is going to be, well, another king after the heart of God. Everything's going great. Do you hear a but coming? But you see, First Kings chapter 11, verse 1 to 6 shares with us that Solomon married many foreign women. Well, that wasn't abnormal in that day. A lot of times kings would do this to create alliances with other kings. So we don't know the full background behind it, but we do know that God had instructed that the kings were not to do this. And Solomon did. And then in time, these various women begin to turn his eyes towards other gods. Not for sure, but the book of Ecclesiastes gives us a lot of insight here. I think that the book of Ecclesiastes is kind of like a diary that possibly Solomon wrote in his latter years as he reflected back over what had transpired. And the story that's told in Ecclesiastes is how that Solomon, because his eyes had been turned towards other gods, begins to try to find fulfillment and happiness in life outside of God. Well, let's kind of highlight through what he did. One, he looked to power, using power to be able to find fulfillment. Remember, he's the king of the most powerful nation in the world at that time. He was literally the world power in a way like has never happened since that time. So he had the power to do whatever he wanted, but he tried to use that to bring happiness and joy. And finally came to the conclusion and said, this is vanity. This is a waste of time. Why am I even trying to do it? So he begins to use his great wisdom and all the things that he knows, and begins to focus upon his knowledge, which is going to have a key message here a little bit later, because knowledge and wisdom aren't exactly the same. Remember that. Because he allows the knowledge to turn his eyes away from God. And yet he's known as the wisest man that ever lived. He has all kinds of great knowledge, but he determines knowledge in itself, it's vanity. It's a waste of time. So he says, well, I'm just going to go out and party and have fun. Now remember, he's the most powerful man that's ever lived. He's probably, from what we can see, the richest man that ever lived. If you took the billionaires of today and put them up next to Solomon, in reality, they wouldn't even come close. He power, knowledge, with everything. You would think. I mean, he can have anything he wants, go anywhere he wants, do anything he wants. If he couldn't have fun and pleasure, something's really wrong. But yet, you know what he determined? Partying and fun, it's vanity. It's not going to bring happiness and joy in itself. So he turns to those great riches. He tries to buy happiness. That doesn't work. So he works hard, puts everything he can into it. He does everything he can. Well, he's given long life, so he's got a long time to do it. He determines this isn't working either. It's vanity as well. He finally concludes in Ecclesiastes 12, 13, and 14. There's only one thing that really matters in life. That's to serve God. What his father had told him in the very beginning that he had gotten away from. And so, from all appearances, Solomon came back to where he should have stayed the whole time. And because of that, God, of course, forgave him. You know, Solomon ended up ruling over 40 years, we find in 1 Kings 11, through verses 41 to 43, and also in 2 Chronicles 9, we find this. Over 40 years that he ruled. And there's many lessons we can learn from his life, but the number one lesson that I'd like to focus on today is, what is true wisdom? How do you get it? You know, I mentioned earlier that pretty much all of the book of Proverbs Solomon wrote, and it's known as the book of wisdom. So we're going to kind of highlight through it a little bit to see some of the truths that we find throughout that book. Number one, we see how important wisdom is. Solomon says in chapter 4, verse 5 to 9, 8, verse 11, 16, verse 16, he stresses it. You want wisdom above everything else. You should sell anything and everything you've got. Make sure you've got true wisdom. Again, he had wisdom, but he got sidetracked and got his eyes off what true wisdom was. He says, it's the most important thing there is in life. Well, if that's the case, how do we know what it is? What is the characteristics of this wisdom? Well, Proverbs gives us some great insight. Number one, Proverbs 9:10 shows that this wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. Now, that doesn't mean terror. It means honor, respect, putting God first and foremost in life, letting him be the number one person at all times in all ways. That's where wisdom begins. You see, that's the reason Proverbs says only a fool says there's no God. Because if that's where wisdom begins, he's the source of wisdom. And that means if you're not reaching out to the God of the Bible, well, true wisdom is not even possible for you. Wow. But we find not only is it the beginning of wisdom, Proverbs 9 and 10, we find Proverbs 15:33, that fear of the Lord is the instruction is wisdom. So it's how you start getting wise. And the only way you're going to continue to be wise, and that's where Solomon messed up. He started good, but then he got his eyes off God. The only way to continue to be wise is to continue in the fear of the Lord, putting him first and foremost. Because of that, a second characteristic of wisdom is that it departs from evil. Whoa. Chapter 14, verse 16. It departs from evil. It gets away from it. Paul writes in the New Testament, and he says anything even smells like evil or sin, or he said, run from it. Don't see how close you can get to it. True wisdom says, I'm going to separate myself absolutely, completely, 100%. I'm not going to have anything that even faintly resembles evil or sin. I'm going to stay away. That's wisdom. True wisdom, fear the Lord, departing from evil, and wins souls. Chapter 11, verse 30 of Proverbs. Probably due to the time that this is written, This is not a reference to soul winning because Jesus hasn't come yet to give his heart and life. So this is probably a reference to making friends, but not just any friend. Again, the secret, surround yourself with wise, wise people, people that love God, people that are following God, people that are serving God. Surround yourself with good friends, ones that'll stick closer than a brother, that are always there. So that's what true wisdom does. It wins souls. And repeatedly, I mean, like chapter 9, verse 8 and 9, chapter 10, verse 8 and verse 14, chapter 12, verse 15, chapter 13, verse 1 and verse 20, and chapter 18, verse 15, and chapter 21 and verse 11, a few of them, listens to instruction and rebuke. True wisdom listens up. It doesn't bullheadedly go its own way. It listens up. So it fears the Lord, parts from evil, makes friends, and it listens to instruction and rebuke. It seeks for wisdom from those around it. Also, true wisdom is known for wise speech. Chapter 15, verse 2, verse 7. I mentioned earlier that there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. Well, if you think about it, wisdom seeks after and properly uses knowledge. It's very important. But if you remove wisdom, knowledge can be the basis of both wise and foolish speech. Sometimes a person of great knowledge can be absolutely a fool. Because again, true wisdom has the fear of the Lord. Anything that tries to take God out of the picture cannot be wise. And when we look to knowledge, or we look to wealth, or we look to power, or we look to anything else to try to bring fulfillment in life, we'll find it is, as Solomon said, vanity, a waste of time. We must keep our eyes up on God, depart from evil, surround ourselves with good friends, listen to instruction and rebuke, and then look to God and ask wisdom and direction on how we use the knowledge He gives us, and that we use it in a way that always honors Him. Yes, wisdom will result in strength and protection. Chapter 24, verse 5. It results in riches. In fact, it's even referred to riches as like a crown of honor to the wise person. In other words, it shows that their wisdom has brought this to them. Chapter 14, verse 24. It creates a lot of accomplishment in life. Chapter 24, verse 3. And eventually, true wisdom will inherit glory, not just on this earth. Thank goodness for the good things God does give us, but eternal glory. But what is truly the mark of wisdom? Just that, eternal glory, eternal presence with God. True, honest, the number one thing is that true wisdom, the true value, the true reward is it'll draw us close to God. Well, I need that kind of wisdom. How can I get it? James chapter 1, verse 5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. You see, first of all, go to God. Remember, that's where the fear of the Lord, that's where it starts and that's where it continues. Ask of God. He's the source. Only He can give you true wisdom. Oh, you can get knowledge from books and from reading and etc. But the wisdom to use that knowledge, the true wisdom, will only come as we keep our eyes focused upon God. And then, as we've already seen in the life of Solomon, don't just go to God. Keep your eyes upon God. Hear and obey His instructions. The truly wise man or woman will go to God, listen to God, and follow all that God says. First of all, that's why he's given us the Bible. So it is his word. It's his message. Study it. Look at it closely. Read it. Not just to interpret, but read it to see what it says. Interpret the Bible by the Bible. You see, people can have a lot of knowledge of the Bible, but if they're not looking to God to use the knowledge, it can come across as foolishness rather than wisdom. The Bible points us to God. That's its number one purpose. Study it to see what God wants you to hear. And then God speaks into our heart. If we keep our eyes on him, we're reading his word, we're praying, we're seeking after him, he will speak into our hearts and speak into our lives. And yes, he's provided spiritual guidance through leaders that he places in the church. But those leaders must keep their eyes on God. They must stay in his word, and they must be careful that they don't just make the word, the Bible, a tool for their use to twist and to turn, but that they use it to carefully instruct in the ways of the Lord. We must look to God and seek after him. And if we truly do that with a full open heart, James 1:5 said, God will give us wisdom. Look to God. Keep your eyes on him. Don't settle for all the fake wisdom that is being thrown at us today in many times, in many ways. But make sure that all of your knowledge is held up and supported by your wisdom, your relationship with God Almighty. And then you can be a wise man, a wise woman. God bless you.